extension of the space of your quietness progressively fills. Fills the head, and comes out. And that can easily fill a room. And in his meditation, he says, now extend oneself out to fill the entire forest. And then he talks about the ancient name for India, Jambudvipa, that one's meditation can fill the entire continent. And it goes on from there to quite extraordinary dimensions. Let's begin with our tapes. In the Indian fashion, this is the way to meditate. But the Taoist does not meditate that way. By the time it comes to us, after many thousands of years, there are many weavings and braidings and junctures, and it's for sure that there are Taoist yogas. But to the Chinese sensibility, sitting and extending your presence out from quiet profundity doesn't really appeal that much. The Chinese are really like Americans, not like most Americans that you would see today, but like the original Americans. Not like the Europeans when they first came here and they were afraid of the wilderness. But those first generations of people who became used to the continental silence of the wilderness, who got over the European fear of openness on a continental scale and experienced it instead as a freedom. What those Americans liked doing most was walking through the forest. And that's the Chinese style too. To the Chinese sage, what is really delectable is to walk through mountains and streams without end. Whereas to the Indian sage, to be in a yogic balance and unmoving in the forest is what is delightful. So all of the postures are called by their Sanskrit term asanas. And there's no term like that in Chinese. All of the Chinese terms are kinetic. They have to do with being one with the flow. Whereas the Sanskrit terms all have to do with that asana that particularly works for you to focus. So that the very term for meditation in Sanskrit is spelled in transcription D-H-Y-A-N-A. Dhyana. Dhyana means concentration. It means getting it right, getting it perfect, getting it compacted, bringing it right here. And when dhyana is practiced, what comes out of the practice is called tapas in Sanskrit. It means power. It's like when you condense the levels of this world, when you squeeze out the relationality, of time-space is held by energy. And so as you concentrate, you squeeze the energy out of time-space. And as you concentrate, there's more and more energy then that is magnetically there for you and no longer in the time-space relations. So that when you, through pressure of and forceful concentration, are able to bring all of time-space to a single point, that one-pointedness, time and space no longer have that energy. It's like the action of a neutron star. Where does that energy go? That energy remains in the time-space structures that would have been, but since time-space materiality and its relationality has been condensed to a single point, the structures of that energy then are available for the mind, which expands itself out. And so the yogi assumes that energy. And if the yogi understands the structures of energy and the way in which the mind can be commensurate with that, the yogi then has the energies that time-space used to have. One's mind assumes the powers that be. And this is the Indian fashion. And it's been the fashion in India for tens of thousands of years. In China, it's different. In China, it's not so much that the mind assumes the powers left by the meditation, the concentration to a single point. In China, the appreciation is to participate in the ecology of the flow. The ecology of the flow has, for the Chinese sense, not a single pointedness, but very similar outlook to the nuclear physics or the astrophysics concept of the Barry Center. The Barry Center is a focus that's made mutually by two things that revolve around that single center, the Barry Center. It's like it wasn't understood until our time. The sun does not revolve around the earth, nor does the earth revolve around the sun. But the truth is that the earth and the sun revolve around each other and create a Barry center, which is the real focus. To the Chinese, This makes real good sense. To the Indian, this is an illusion which must be seen through. But to the Chinese, it's the way life really is. The Chinese have a taste for the mystery of life. The Indians have a taste for seeing through the illusion of the mystery. It's a different palate, just a different taste. It's like the Indian tastes like something bitter, but the Chinese taste like something salty. It's just a difference. And they're like major versions of the way in which we can be human. The Greek is different from the Indian and the Chinese. The Greek sense of taste is for something sour. They don't go for something bitter or for something salty, but for something sour. They like to know that at the final, last, laconic moment, that you're still there to observe it vanish. And the sense of Greek tragedy is that you survive the tragedy which was played out in front of you. And the American Indian is quite different. The American Indian likes something sweet. Its American Indian taste is for the sweetness. The sweet grass, the sweet water, the sweetness. And so in a way you could put India and China and Greece and the North American Indians in this kind of basic quaternary that the sense of taste has. Yes, indeed. Taste is not an infinite spectrum, but only four basic tastes. Bitter, salty, sour, sweet. All the variants on that are due to smell, to fragrance, to aroma being combined with taste. So the exotic deliciousness of food is a combination of senses. But for taste, there's only these four. And those four work because of a protein. And the same protein that gives the sense of taste gives the sense of sight. The rods and the iris work the same as the taste buds and the tongue. Variants. What we're doing with the Tao Te Ching is appreciating the Chinese way of being human. Why is it important to us? Because contemporary science is more Chinese than anything else. 1990s physics is more Chinese than Indian, American, or East Indian. It's more Chinese than it is Greek. 1990s astronomy is very Chinese. So one of the reasons that we're taking time to look at the Chinese experience of life is because one of the major qualities of our life is whether science is going to be a helper or a tyrant over our lives, over our futures. And it frankly can go either way. It's very ambivalent by 1992. It's very ambivalent. The arguments in the last day in the Congress of the United States over whether to have the super collider is an argument essentially on whether you trust science or not to be a major participation in our lives. For those who do not trust science, we face about 500 years of decay. For those who do, we face about 200 years of renaissance. So great, huge values and issues, avalanches, tidal waves of meaning are ramped up. But there are only two ways to approach contemporary science. You can either do it through mathematics, Western mathematics, or you could do it through an appreciation of the Chinese sense of life philosophies through the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching. Now, an educator like myself is very pragmatic. I don't think you can teach recursive functions to hundreds of millions of people. I don't think you can teach tensor applications or even trigonometric functions to hundreds of millions of people. But I do think that you can acquaint people in their sensitivity with the Tao Te Ching and the I Ching by the hundreds of millions, so that at least they have a feeling tone, fighting chance of appreciating that this is all right. It's not a danger, it's not anti-life, it's not a threat, but it's a way of appreciating life. And that 21st century science is a real glorious Renaissance quality. So, part of the reason of teaching something like this has a lot of pragmatic value. And I'm not particularly interested in teaching hundreds of millions right now. I mean, that can be done quite easily, frankly. 4 or 5 years from now, it would be quite easy to do. But what's important here, and what we're trying to do here, is extremely refined. We're trying just off the cuff and off the street to come together and see what happens when somebody tries to make a translation that is in a Chinese tone of Lao Tzu, and not in the tone of a Chinese with a Japanese mind, or of a Neo-Confucian, or of the 50 or 60 other philosophical stances that a really educated Chinese could assume by the late 20th century. There are lots of different styles of being Chinese by this time. I'm seeking to go back and let Lao Tzu speak as he spoke, only using English. And after that, whatever else is done with it is your concern or other people's concerns. And the reason for doing this is that none of the translations that exist that I've been able to appreciate, the English, the French, a little bit of some of the German translations, none of them give Lao Tzu at all. And all of them, in various parts, seriously missay what Lao Tzu says. When we come to chapter 26, I brought 2 translations here. I brought Wing Sip Chan's and Robert Hendrick's translations. One's a very good Chinese translation, one's a very good English academic translation. But one has to go beyond this level of goodness. They translate the Chinese character shan as good, where I would translate it as high. Not because shan is very similar to shan, meaning mountain, but that the Chinese sense is not that something is good, but that it rises to the top. So that whenever you have the Chinese experience of reality, it's always that one in traveling the mountains and streams without end has learned to go on the high path. And someone who's learned to go on the high path becomes a spirit, a Shen, someone who is free to travel in those mountains and streams without end, is then a spirit person. Now the Chinese sense is that our psychophysical person is brought together by an earth energy and a sky energy. Literally, that heaven and earth each donate. Father Heaven donates a little bit, Mother Earth donates a little bit, the Hun and the Po, and they come together. But they are held together like an expression of a fraction is held together by an equanimity. When you say 1/2, the numerator and the denominator are held together by a line in between them. So that any particular fraction is quite individual, but is universally characteristic of being held together by the fractional relationship, which is essentially a ratio. The Chinese sense is that the Hun and the Po, the heaven and the earth, are held together by a spirit. Not just a spiritual quality, but by a third whose real nature is to be either in between heaven and earth or where heaven and earth come together. So that the spirit in a person is where the heaven and earth, the Hun and the Po, have come together in them. And what makes them whole is their spirit. At death, the Hun and the Po naturally go back to their own realms. The one rises in the air, the other dissolves into the earth. So that the Chinese sense is that one has to make sure that the earth is purified, that where they go into the earth, that that's taken care of and is kept separate. But also you have to watch out for that which is ascended, because they tend to want to come back and get back into things. So the curve on the roofs is to make sure that when they come down, they slide back and go back up. Why? Because both the earth and the sky parts are looking for the other half. And it's very rare that they would ever find their other half, so they want to take somebody else's other half. So the Chinese sense of watching out that spirits don't get you is not just those guys down there, but also those guys up there. In other words, you got to protect yourself on two fronts at once all the time. So the Chinese are not ambivalent about psychic things, but they're two-fisted about it. Let's fight them both off at the same time. Let's make sure that we satisfy them and let them know, we know you're there, we respect you, you respect us. So we'll burn some money for these guys, and we'll make some sacrifices for these guys, and we want them to know that that's enough. Don't bother us. Why are they not so deadly, so radioactive when they're together in the person? Because the spirit, the Shen, is there to mediate, to modulate, to unify. So that when spirit Gen is consciously active, the forces of heaven and the forces of earth get along. Then man is the bridge between heaven and earth. What really makes a person human? Bridges. But bridges, like that line in the fraction, makes it a whole. Now, if that spirit gen is not active, if it's covered with sludge, psychic sludge, then the Hun and the Po and the person are at war. Then the person is dominated by conflict. And everything that they do spreads the tone of that conflict. Now, you can't bring somebody else's Hun into play to quiet down their Po. Well, you can do that, but it's very temporary, isn't it? And very chancy and risky. What if that person then, has problems of their own? It might exacerbate the situation. So the Chinese solution is very practical. The only way is to activate your own Shen, your own spirit. If I can get you to activate your own spirit, then your Han and your Po are not going to bother me. And it's another form of protection for me. I've got the curved root for those guys. I've got the sacrifices to the ancestors for these guys. And I constantly remind myself by pithy little apocryphal sayings that, one can have wisdom. So the essential tone of Chinese religion sounds to the West like philosophy, but really is religious. Every time a Chinese would quote Confucius, he's trying to protect himself by awakening your spirit to handle your situation. You got enough trouble with his fault. To the Taoists, spirits are real. To the Taoists, the problem is not so much with the Hun and the Po, but what about the Shen that's released? It doesn't go up and it doesn't go up. Where is it? It's in nature. It's not down into the earth or up into the sky, but it's here in the human realm. So a sage is like a really important person because a sage whose Shen is freed in their lifetime is able to be like a shepherd for all of these Shen, participate with them, and then things are okay. To the Taoist sense, chapter 26 is perfect expression then to remind someone to awaken themselves that be sure that you're carrying the burden of responsibility which you really have. Because if you figure you don't have it, then someone else has got to carry your burden. And because there are so many people like you who are not carrying their own burdens, pretty soon there's not going to be anybody who can handle all that. Now the word that is important here is Chung. Not quite like Kane Chung. Chung means heavy. Heavy. It's heavy. I had a black revolutionary friend in San Francisco who about 1965 came into the humanities department, and after he learned to appreciate a few things, one time in a seminar, the first thing that he said after about 3 months in this seminar on Greek tragedy, he said, Sophocles be a heavy dude. Saying, yeah. heavy in the sense not that you can't lift it, but heavy in that it has a substantive, serious quality. And so the chapter's title is Heavy Te. Heavy Te. Heavy Te. Now here's how the translations run. This is Wing-Tse Chan's, then Hendricks, then my own. And you see that we're talking different ways. We are talking different ways. And what I would like to make available for your consideration is that I'm talking Lao Tzu. I'm not speaking English, and I'm sure not speaking Chinese English, but I'm speaking Lao Tzu as best I can. Here's Wing-Tse Chen, who was a Neo-Confucian. The heavy is the root of the light. The tranquil is the ruler of the hasty. Therefore the sage travels all day without leaving his baggage. Even at the sight of magnificent scenes, he remains leisurely and indifferent. How is it that a lord with 10,000 chariots should behave light-heartedly in his empire? If he is light-hearted, the minister will be destroyed. If he is hasty, the ruler is lost. Okay? Without trying to demean a very famous professor, it's a little bit like fortune cookie advice. It is not really the profundity which Lao Tzu is. Lao Tzu is one of the handful of original high-speaking geniuses from this particular planet. He would do very well in interstellar competition. He stacks up there. He and Plotinus and Jesus and Buddha, they hold their own very nicely. Here is Hendricks, which is a little different. It's not like a Neo-Confucian fortune cookie advice, but this is like academically tailored to be correct. And so it is correct. Here's how it is. Again, chapter 26. The heavy is the root of the light. Tranquility is the lord of agitation. Therefore, the gentleman, in traveling all day, does not get far away from his luggage carts. When he's safely inside a walled-in, protected hostel, and resting at ease, only then does he transcend all concern. How can the king of 10,000 chariots treat his own person more lightly than the whole land? If you regard things too lightly, then you lose the basic. If you're agitated, you lose the lure. Quote, lure. Okay? So there are two translations, both published, both fairly well known now, and so forth. And they're not speaking Lao Tzu at all, and they're losing the meaning. They're not saying in such a way that a Taoist would smile. Here's how Lao Tzu talks in English. Heavy Te. Heavy is light's root. Quiet is moving's master. Therefore, Spirit Gen, having his day's walk, not strays from freighting the heavy. Though having magnificent sights, he calmly stays unexcited in manner. Here, though, the 10,000 chariots of a magistrate, yet therewith his person too light for heaven, earth, too light, then lose ministers, restless, then lose master. So the translation that I have here is Lao Tzu disclosing for us heavy te. One more time. Heavy is light's root. Quiet is moving's master. Therefore, Spirit Jen, having his day's walk, not strays from freighting the heavy. Now, this is quite different from, therefore the gentleman in traveling all day does not get far away from his luggage cards. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's not mysterious at all. I mean, that's like the caddy on the golf course saying, watch out for thieves. I mean, that's not, what is Winston Chanson? He says, therefore the sage travels all day without leaving his baggage. No, that's not what Lao Tzu says. He says, Spirit Jen, having his day's walk, not strays from freighting the heavy. And he's got his heavy te all the time. Or as they used to say in Detroit about 30 years ago, he's got his mojo working. Because if someone's showing up, he's right there on top of them. Or as Crocodile Dundee says to the mugger holding up the knife, he says, that's not a knife, this is a knife. Spirit Jen, having his day's walk, not strays from freighting the heavy. Though having magnificent sights, he calmly stays unexcited in manner. Doesn't mean he retreats from it, he doesn't stop walking. It means that as he's going along, he's keeping rhythm with the tempo of the street. He can tell the difference between a cat in a garbage can and some guy cocking his gun. He's with the scene as it really is. He calmly stays unexcited in manner. Here, though, the 10,000 chariots of a magistrate, a really important kind of person, a lot of authority in this world, a lot of power in this world. Look at this guy. He's got 10,000 chariots. Yet, therewith his person too light for heaven, earth. Too light, then lose ministers. Restless, then lose the master. So, in Heavy Te, Lao Tzu brings this full sense, not in an Indian type of a concentration to one point, like it's going to be real heavy, that one point. Not that. It's that in the motion of Te, it is oneness all the time. It is distinctively oneness all the time. So Te is heavy through this ineffable unity. There's a whole difference. There was no development in India of karate. But out of the Chinese experience, the Japanese refined karate, where you put out the candle not by ever touching the flame, but by coming exactly, bringing all of the movement exactly to the place where the oxygen is gone. From just that exact spot. I'm too old to do it anymore. I've hit the candle. I'm a decrepit version of a fabulous youth. The heavy te is not so much that it's just focused in one-pointedness. The Hindu word for that one point, in Buddhism it's ekagrata, but in Hinduism it's called bindu. In Hinduism it folds in upon itself and vanishes. The Hindu predilection of a modern physicist makes him think that black holes swallow energy into oblivion. Whereas a Taoist physicist knows that there's an ecology of motion and that goes somewhere else. It goes into the magnetoelectric spectrum where it comes out in huge spikes of magnetic capacity and little tiny electrical components. He doesn't have any trouble with that. A Hindu-trained physicist like Oppenheimer, like Robert Oppenheimer, makes atomic bombs. But a Taoist affinitized physicist like Niels Bohr makes a whole different kind of mathematics. So quite a remarkable difference. So it's not just a small thing. It's not just that somebody prefers this and somebody else prefers that. That kind of shoddy distinctiveness brought us to the brink of oblivion with the Cold War. If we had had Niels Bohr physicists first instead of Einsteinian, Oppenheimerian physics technology, we would have had a world that could have handled atomic energy and not had to go through the nightmare of the atom bomb before we learn that this is a very dangerous world that we've opened up. But you don't find Oppenheimer quoting Lao Tzu, you find him quoting, I am Shiva, destroyer of worlds, and I am come, full grown before you. Who are you that have called me forth? It makes a great deal of difference. Are we just about there? 2 minutes. Makes a great deal of difference. What I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to encourage you to use the sensitivity that we've built up over the past months. You have the sensitivity to be able to appreciate now the Chinese flavor of Lao Tzu. He is Chinese. But you can appreciate his Chinese quality. And once you appreciate Lao Tzu's Chinese quality, it's like that will be a door that opens and all of Chinese civilization will be available for your appreciation if you wanted to. All of it. All of it. It's like once somebody understands the way in which the mind of Pythagoras works, Greek civilization is open to it. Once somebody has understood the mind of the Buddha, all of Indian civilization is open to you. These are major figures. Major figures. And it's a kind of a quality that we're trying to do. One last time, heavy te, and then we'll take our break. And here it is. Heavy is light's root. Quiet is moving's master. Therefore, spirit gem, having his day's walk, not strays from freighting the heavy. Though having magnificent views, he calmly stays, unexcited in manner. Hear, though, the 10,000 chariots of a magistrate, yet therewith his person too light for heaven and earth, too light, then lose ministers, restless, then lose master. Let's take a break. The translation for the title is Skillful Function. Skillful Function. In Buddhism, after you get over all kinds of illusions about what Buddhism is or what it's going to do, the kind of grasping for enlightenment. I want to get out of my problems. I want to solve my problem. Or I want nirvana. After you get over all that sort of thing, you realize that Buddhism is a method. And it's a method of training you in skillful means. And that upasana is much, much, much more important than any of the other aspects of it. This chapter, chapter 27, is the Taoist skillful function. Not skillful means, skillful function. And so in a very characteristic, what became a characteristic Chinese fashion, Lao Tzu lays out line after line after line of examples, and then having laid out 5 lines of examples, brings them together and makes a point that radiates out over the spectrum that's been illuminated. In other words, it's like this. It's like the 5 lines are like plucking the 5 strings of a Chinese lute. And once you have activated all of the strings and they're all in motion, then the voice would come out and would sing something to go with that harmonic that's been established. So that's the kind of structure, emotional structure, Chinese mystical wisdom, emotional structure that Lao Tzu is using here. And so here are the 5 lines, and then you'll hear a therefore. And again, he talks about Spirit Gen. Spirit Gen is that third of the 5-phase energy cycle. It's not the Tao. It's not the Tang. It's not the ideas, the symbols. It's not the world of the 10,000 things. It's right in the middle where we are. And where we ordinarily are is Gen, but when we are able to activate our Shen, our spirit, then it's Spirit Gen. And then he'll say something from that. Here are the 5 strings. High walkers need no rutted track. High talking needs no rotting trick. High accounting needs no counting tabs. High security needs no bolt and keys, yet none can open. High binding needs no rope and cord, yet none can loosen. Therefore, Spirit Gen, always high, saves Gen. For needing no outward Gen. Always high saves things, for needing no outward things. This is called hidden brightness. Therefore, high Gen itself, not high Gen, its teacher. Not high Gen itself, high Gen its soil. Not value his teacher, not love his soil, though intelligent, great bewilderment. This is called special spiritual. Now this is hard. It's hard because he drags the fineness out and unfurls it for us as far as we could see. So it's not so much that it's hard to follow, we can see what he's doing, but it's hard to let ourselves go and be with his flourish. Now 2 points in here. 2 points. He's saying here that high Gen itself is not high Gen. Now, in order to help make this distinction, and notice that if you have an equivocable mind, you don't see any distinction at all. And in the Chinese, usually it's translated in such a way that you lose the meaning. He's not talking equivocally at all. So what I've done here is I've underlined high in the first statement and then underlined Gen in the second. High Gen itself, not high Gen. It's like spirit Gen is not the same as Gen. It's a hidden brightness that when released comes into play. A holy human being is not just a human being. You can see 1 million human beings, but if you've never seen a holy human being, you have never seen a holy human being. You can't imagine a holy human being on the basis of experience of just human beings. There's no way. But once you've seen a holy human being released within a human, you can't mistake it. There it is. Wow. We didn't know that we came that way. It's like Jesus says, did God ever say to any angel, you are my son? They're ministers and servants and messengers, but man is in the family. It's different. It's different. So he's saying here, high Gen itself, not high Gen. Colon, its teacher. High Gen is really the teacher to Gen. So a person has to respect their inner guide, which is your teacher. And even though it's you, don't mistake it in equivocation as just you. That kind of familiarity breeds contempt. And making it sophomoric like a comic strip and saying, well, you have a conscience within you that whispers to you, be good. Don't break that one. Be nice. Because that image is on the mythic horizon and engenders its polar opposite. So just as you have a conscience whispering good things, you have a devil within whispering bad things. And so you get the kind of condition that Benjamin Franklin said was a proverb among English sailors, that God sends meat and the devil sends cooks. You don't have a chance. You see? So you want to stay off that polarized level. The polarized psychic level always has the polarities working. So if you think that your inner spiritual guide is like a good conscience, you're subconsciously going to also believe that you have a devil inside. And you see somebody else who doesn't have their conscience working, you assume their devil is working in them. And there's no end of problems in human history because of making those assumptions about other people. Those people are demonic. They're not like us. at all. Look, they gotta go. You can't trust those white devils. Well, you can't trust those black devils. It's a polarized ping pong game that never ends, a vicious ping pong game. So you don't want to reduce, you don't want to have wisdom in its reductive watering down as advice. Because, why? Because it's destructive. It breeds polarity all the time. And what comes into play is not the spirit, but the psychic tensions, the Han and the Po. The second point, not high gen itself, high gen its soil, high gen hyphen its soil. Not only the teacher, but the soil. Notice here that the Chinese sense, Lao Tzu is very Chinese. His sense is that you got to take into consideration like the teacher from above and also the soil from below. Both those are going on together. Those are givens. That's the way it is. So that when spirit gen, when your spirit is active, it uses the soil and it uses the teacher together. So don't get yourself psychologically to where you have an aversion to things that are soil. Don't poo-poo this world, because this world is the soil out of which we grow. And we need it because it's the natural balance to these psychic energies. Somebody who has long experience of surviving psychic adventures is really glad that things are here. You get really glad that you can put your foot down. If you go through some forms of neuroses where you're afraid to step anywhere because you're going to fall straight through into oblivion, after 10 or 12 minutes of that, you're really glad that you can put your behind on the chair and stay there. There are all sorts of things. Or the converse is also true. Somebody who's just completely imprisoned in stodginess needs a breath of that psychic fresh air. So what he's saying here is that spirit gen needs both of those together, otherwise there's no togetherness. And so he says, not high gen itself, high gen its soil. Not value his teacher, not love his soil, though intelligent, great bewilderment. Because as soon as you poo-poo one or the other, then you're in an imbalance. Then the third phase of the energy cycle is not going to be working. And because you don't balance here where you are, the balance tends to be projected one step further. In where? In the mind. In the ideas. In the symbols. And if the balance is in the symbols, then the tendency is to make sure that the things of this world yield the right answers in the sixth phase. Because if you throw the balance out of the third phase to the fourth phase is not going to just be satisfied with one more phase. It's going to want that fifth phase to produce results. And so you get the authoritarian personality in every corporation in the world. We want results. We want aggressive people who produce results. And this, frankly, to a Taoist, is madness. It's clinical, certifiable insanity to a Taoist. I mean, you would make out the admittance slip immediately. Send this boy to the mountains and streams without end. Send this 63-year-old boy back because he didn't learn nothing. It's like that. Here's how Wing-Sit Chen translates chapter 27. A good traveler leaves no track or trace. A good speech leaves no flaws. A good reckoner leaves no counters. A well-shut door needs no bolts, and yet it cannot be opened. A well-tied knot needs no rope, and yet none can untie it. Therefore the sage is always good in saving men, and consequently no man is rejected. He is always good in saving things, and consequently nothing is rejected. This is called following the light of nature. Therefore the good man is the teacher of the bad, and the bad is the material from which the good may learn. He who does not value the teacher or greatly care for the material is greatly deluded, although he may be learned. Such is the essential mystery. Now, you get an A for the essay rhetorically, but you get a big F for Taoism. That's not Tao. Using California jargon, that's kind of like Neo-Confucian palaver. That's making language sound real good. It's a rhetorical shape to it, but it does not deliver that Chinese Taoist sense. Here is Hendrick's translation of the same chapter, chapter 27. The good traveler leaves no track behind. The good speaker speaks without blemish or flaw. The good counter doesn't use tallies or chips. The good closer of doors does so without bolt or lock, and yet the door cannot be opened. The good tire of knots ties without rope or cord, yet his knots can't be undone. Therefore the sage is constantly good at saving men and never rejects anyone. And with things he never rejects useful goods. This is called doubly bright. Therefore, the good man is the teacher of the good, and the bad man is the raw material for the good. To not value one's teacher and not cherish the raw goods, though one had great knowledge, he would still be greatly confused. This is called the essential of the sublime. Now you can see that Hendrick's cribbed Wing-Sit Chen. It doesn't do any good to model yourself on second-rate teachers, because what you have then is the third hand of a second rate. Why pursue that when you can be in the presence of the first rate yourself? Now, chapter 28 gave me a lot of difficulty because the syntax in chapter 28 is extremely difficult because of the influence of chapter 28 throughout Chinese history. And later on, a lot of the influence came into play in Zen. The Zen idea of the purity of the uncarved block. Alan Watts made a great deal of this particular concept. He made a great deal out of the particular concept, but I don't find anywhere in Alan Watts that he went back to Lao Tzu. He saw it in a Zen way and was aware that somehow it had something to do with Chuang-Tzu, but I don't find the appreciation going back and really settling in. Part of the difficulty with a lot of the Zen writings in English in the 1950s and 1960s is that they took as their highest teaching Japanese writings and versions of Zen. And later on, when they went into Chinese studies, it was largely through Japanese teachers again, like D.T. Suzuki, who was very excellent. But he was so comprehensive that most people just didn't hear the comprehension. They picked little fragments out. And one is left with really fourth-rate, third-hand, second-rate lineages. And one gets a kind of a cutesy, beatnik quality of phony wisdom, as if Allen Ginsberg was some kind of a sage or something, and actually a very ignorant human being. As if Gregory Corso were a real Zen poet, actually very trashy. Chapter 28, I've translated the title as Resumed or Resuming Uncarved. Put it in the gerund, it's better. Resuming Uncarved. And the sense here is that when the 5-phase energy cycle comes to the things of this world in the 5th phase, the things of this world, if they have come through completely the Tao, Te, Gen, E, Li, they return. They go again. They re-go to Tao, leaving no particular leftover at all. To the Chinese sense, what's really there is the motion of the ecology of the 5-phase energy cycle happening. And this is called the circulation of the light, later on in Ming Taoism, like the secret of the golden flower, the circulation of the light. Unfortunately, most of the translators in the Ching dynasty were influenced by India, and most of the German and English translators in the 20th century were likewise influenced by India, and so they thought that there must be some kind of Taoist chakras in a person, and that the circulation of the light somehow has to do with this sort of thing. And because the Ching Chinese commentaries look like the German commentaries and the English commentaries, everybody thought that's how it was. And so Richard Wilhelm and Carl Jung making a translation of The Secret of the Golden Flower, it seems as if that's the way things are, as if it were some kind of Chinese Kundalini. And this is not it at all. That's not it at all. Is actually extraneous. Is in fact extraneous. And so one can be misled and suffer the misleading on a very, very large scale and not even be aware of it. 28. Resuming uncarved. Who knows itself's masculine and keeps itself's feminine becomes heaven-earth's cleft. Being heaven-earth's cleft, eternal Te not left, re-goes, returns to his beginnings. Who knows itself's white and keeps itself's black becomes heaven-earth's measure. Being heaven-earth's measure, eternal Te not masked, re-goes, returns to non-self. Who knows itself's glory and keeps itself's humility becomes heaven-earth's indention. Being heaven-earth's indention, eternal Te then intact, re-goes, returns to uncarved. uncarved, readied, then being's a vessel, spirit gem, utilizing this, then being official Ching. Therefore, great handling, not carved up. Now that is a very difficult chapter to say in English. Here's how Winsett Chan translates this. And you'll see that this is pretty far afield from our object. He who knows the male and keeps to the female becomes the ravine of the world. Being the ravine of the world, he will never depart from eternal virtue, but returns to the state of infancy. He who knows the white and yet keeps to the black becomes the model for the world. Being the model for the world, he will never deviate from eternal virtue, but returns to the state of the non-ultimate. He who knows glory but keeps to humility becomes the valley of the world. Being the valley of the world, he will be proficient in eternal virtue, and returns to the state of simplicity, parentheses, uncarved wood. When the uncarved wood is broken up, it is turned into concrete things. But when the sage uses it, he becomes the leading official. Therefore, the great ruler does not cut up. It's like a passage out of the film script for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Excuse me, but it's about the level that someone like Steven Spielberg would write wisdom. Not to detract from Indy and his director, but it's not Lao Tzu. That's like being real clear about the lights on one of those arcade games, the pinball machines, and from that to try then to imagine what the starry cosmos really is. Just because you have a constellated array of lights that you know the pattern of and how to work with it, baby, doesn't mean that you can go out into the universe of galactic structures and be at home. There's no correlation at all. There's nothing in that. Here's Hendrick's translation of the same chapter. When you know the male, yet hold to the female, you'll be the ravine of the country. Now that's kind of pithy. When you're the ravine of the country, your constant virtue will not leave. Now even Mae West would have thought about that. And when your constant virtue doesn't leave, and by this time you're breathless, right? You'll return to the state of the infant, which is why they call beautiful women baby. It's language that is like an arcade game. It lights up the little lights. Is it too difficult? Is it offensive? Not working? When you know the pure yet hold on to the soil, you'll be the valley of the country. This is his translation. When you're the valley of the country, your constant virtue is complete. And when your constant virtue is complete, you'll return to the state of uncarved wood. Now that's very difficult to follow, and if you do, it didn't get you anywhere. You can't walk out that door, out into nighttime Los Angeles, with this as wisdom. You're not going to go anywhere. Even if read out loud by Kevin Costner, you're not going to go anywhere. It's not going to do anything for you. When you know the white, yet hold on to the black, you'll be the model for the country. It's like Bill Clinton, excuse me. And when you're the model for the country, your constant virtue will not go astray. And when your constant virtue does not go astray, you'll return to the condition which has no limit. When uncarved wood is cut up, it's turned into vessels. When the sage is used, he becomes the head of the officials. Truly, great carving is done without splitting up. You see, it veers away into the paradoxical all the time. We talked about that last week. And as soon as paradox comes into play, you know that you're dealing with polarities. And that the polarities are not Taoist at all. Not at all. Not ever. If somebody says that yin-yang is a polarity, you can just go on your way. Because that's not They're complementary. They're always in motion together. Because the very center that they share is the Tao. Here's the translation again. Resuming uncarved. Who knows itself's masculine and keeps itself's feminine becomes heaven earth's cleft. Being heaven earth's cleft, eternal Te, not left, returns to his beginnings. Who knows itself's light and keeps itself's black becomes heaven earth's measure. Being heaven earth's measure, eternal Te, not masked, returns to non-self. Who knows itself's glory and keeps itself's humility becomes heaven earth's indention. Being heaven earth's indention, eternal Te, then intact. Why is that so? Because Te is one, not because it asserts itself to be powerfully one, but Te is oneness mysteriously because it's the indentation that Tao, by just being Tao, makes, and so in time space Te takes the indentation of Tao and is then one. One by virtue of receiving the impress of Tao. Being heaven earth's indention, eternal Te, then intact, returns to uncarved. We've had 3 sets. Uncarved, readied, then being's a vessel. Notice there's no metaphor here at all. Lao Tzu is not using metaphor language. He's using high talk, as William Yates, W.B. Yeats used to say. High talk. He's saying, when this gestalt, which is not made, but occurs because it has accepted without any assertion of its own the complete impress of Tao, that particular vessel, being, then, is what Spirit Gen utilizes. Spirit Gen is the kind of cook that uses a vessel like this. Spirit Gen utilizes this, then being official chief, therefore great handling, not carve up. In other words, the uncarved block of Te is preserved in its oneness in Spirit Gen. But Spirit Gen utilizes it. but utilizes it so that every use of it, the wholeness of it, comes into play. The old thing that I hark to a lot, Robert Rosatesti's statement 800 years ago that every raindrop in a rainbow is itself a rainbow. Or in modern nuclear physics, a soliton generates in its way the complete soliton. There's never any fragmentation. Every photon from any given star has all the star's information in it. Every cell of a body has the complete genetic structure sequencing of the entire body. It's a truth which is as profound as you want to grind. And what Lao Tzu is saying is that this is the actual pragmatic way in which life really occurs. It really moves by wholeness. Is one of the Upanishads says, from wholeness to wholeness, the real occurs. Every other seeming movement is illusion. To think that some part causes some other part to move and move some other part is a mechanical illusion that is not true at all. And a mind which is schooled to seeing the world in this way mistakes power, like in a fist, for the efficacy of flow. And when a mind like that looks at itself, it wants to be powerful as an ego, not sublime as a spirit. And when it looks at other people, it sees that their ego is potentially a competitor to one's own. And you've got to make sure you hobble them so they don't get away from it. Can you see how pernicious all of this is, and yet how Lao Tzu, in a very comprehensive way, discloses in a language which can be approached through appreciation the actual state of affairs. Chapter 29, then, what could chapter 29 be in this kind of a sequence? Chapter 29, I've left the two characters untranslated because we need that term. We needed Tao and we needed Te. Now the term Wu Wei. Wu Wei. Surging desire to take heaven, earth, and busy at it, I see itself not obtained. Thereby, heaven, earth, divine vessel. Not can be busy, indeed. Busy one mars it. Seizing one loses it. The spiritual wholeness of heaven and earth in its complementation is not something that you can seize. Trying to seize it only mars it. And when you have, or if someone has, or when and anyone has this surging desire to take it, take control of your life. These seminars that cost you $800 or $900 for a weekend, held in little motel banquet rooms out near airports all over the world, I tell you, you've got a right, man, to kick ass and take what you want. This is stupid. It's really stupid. Lao Tzu says, surging desire to take heaven, earth, and busy at it, I see itself not obtained. Thereby heaven, earth, divine vessel, not can be busy, indeed. Busy one mars it, seizing one loses it. Therefore beings Some blaze, others glow. Some breathe warm, others cold. Some strong, others weak. Some carry, others carried. Therefore, spirit Jim abandons extrovertance, abandons extravagance, abandons indulgence. Now that's as close as I can come to what Lao Tzu says. Here's how Wing Tsit Chen translates this. I guess we're near the end. We have time to get both Wing Tsit Chen and Hendricks in. When one desires to take over the empire and act on it, interfere with it, I see that he will not succeed. The empire is a spiritual thing and should not be acted on. Now, is the empire a spiritual thing? Now, to a Neo-Confucian, he would think that way. The whole thing is protect the unity of the empire. The Neo-Confucian of the late Sung harkens back to what? Harkens back to the Han Dynasty. Back to the Confucians of the Han Dynasty. Not back to Confucius of 500 BC, but back to the Confucians of about 200 BC. The Roman Chinese. Han Wu-Ti had 130,000 civil servants working for just him. And their only task was to keep him in power. And they spent every day of all their lives thinking up ways to do their job right so that the chief stays in power. It's a pyramid system where everybody fits and is secure as long as you keep working to keep the top going. The modern corporation is exactly the same way, except it's the profit line. We have got to show a profit. We have got to keep the emperor in business. The same kind of thing. The empire is a spiritual thing and should not be acted on. He who acts on it harms it. This is where you get the kind of do-nothing mysticism. Though somebody's going to be a really good mystic if they don't do anything. If you're nice and polite, and you're real quiet and real careful and don't do anything, that's a very nice mystic. That's the way the authoritarian power manipulators keep people buffaloed and quiet. You be a nice mystic and don't do anything. So when an old-time spirit mystic sage like Gandhi shows up and gets hundreds of millions of people in motion, they say, you're not religious at all, you're just a politician. And he says, well, I use the Bhagavad Gita as my workbook every day. And they say, we don't believe you. We think you're reading the London Times. Wing Tsit Chen ends his translation, among creatures some lead and some follow, some blow hot, some blow cold, some are strong and some are weak, some may break and some may fall. Therefore the sage discards the extremes, the extravagant and the excessive. Hendricks, cribbing him. For those who would like to take control of the world and act on it, I see that with this they simply will not succeed. The world is a sacred vessel. It is not something that can be acted upon. Those who act on it destroy it. Those who hold on to it lose it. With things, some go forward, others follow, some are hot, others submissive and weak. Some rise up while others fall down. Therefore the sage rejects the extreme, the excessive, and the extravagant. Okay, there are their translations. I gave you mine. Let's come back to the beginning. Let's come back to Heavy Tay, to chapter 26, and let's end there, and let's see how Heavy Tay sounds now after about an hour of sensitizing ourselves, acclimating ourselves to the different ways in which this language can be spoken. Heavy is light's root. Quiet is moving's master. Therefore, Spirit Gem, having his day's walk, not strays from freighting the heavy. Though having magnificent sights, he calmly stays unexcited in matter. Hear thou the 10,000 chariots of a magistrate, yet therewith his person too light for heaven earth, too light than lose ministers, restless than lose master. And so this quality of these four here, and we only have 8 more to go. We only have 2 more Thursdays and that's it. These 4 set up chapter 30. Now I would like you to try, like you did with chapter 14, try your hand at chapter 30. Chapter 30 is interesting. D.T. Suzuki translates the title, Be Stingy with Wars. It's a very interesting chapter. Just see what you can do with it. What I'm saying to you is that don't stress yourself out. Just play with it. Get a couple of translations together. Try to get a sense of what it would be talking about. Try to then calm yourself down and feel the tone that you've been able to sensitize yourself to. And see whether the translation you've made would be in keeping with the way Lao Tzu would speak. In other words, I'm trying to encourage you now to overcome one of the worst resistances of our lives. The resistance is purposely inculcated in us so we won't misbehave.